Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday, LinkedIn. Here with a super special guest. Joe Warren from the Commerce Hub team is here to talk about uh, maybe the highs and lows of his experience this year with the QuickBooks to HubSpot integration. How you doing, man?
I am doing great. Always good on a Wednesday because we're over the hump. We're getting closer to the weekend. Going to be a big weekend, and there's a lot of highs to talk about with this integration. We've really made a tremendous amount of progress, and I'm just super pumped to be here and share it with all the listeners. And yeah, how are you, Chris? What's going on with you?
I'm doing great, man. I love talking Commerce Hub. I don't think you guys get nearly enough love for what you've brought forth. So just need to start with thank you so much. I think it's the missing piece, in my opinion, to really make it a full customer platform. Because guess what? Customers gotta pay us, and we gotta know when they do that. And you know, my first when I first got into marketing and sales, I was head of a product. I was production manager, head of a lab. We made a customized product, and so I had to be the guy that said, "Yeah, we can make that. Okay, this is how much it's going to cost." Right. So I ended up having to make quotes, and I was having to do that out of QuickBooks online, and move over to marketing and sales. It's still the only piece of like customer management that we have, and needless to say, not a CRM. So a lot of challenges arose from that, and just learned a lot of, kind of trying to use systems for what they're meant to be used for, and then relying on other systems to do, heavier lifting. So it's interesting, 13 years later, uh, never thought I would be talking about QuickBooks Online on a LinkedIn Live. That's for sure. But it's cool to see that you guys have, helped, because whether we like it or not, the most popular accounting software like in the world. And that's where, just looking at the update today, like 8,500 people like have it installed. We got to serve those people too, man.
We sure do. We sure do. I joined the Commerce Hub product team a little more than a year ago, and overwhelmingly, a bidirectional invoice sync with QuickBooks has been the top requested feature since I joined this team. And we totally understood why. So many people identified with our value proposition, the value proposition of Commerce Hub. Bill out of your CRM, get paid faster, give insight to when somebody becomes a customer to your actual customer motion, right? I think that's such a key thing. Is that's the whole point. That's why we're here, is to get customers, and then to have people do all that, manage that process in the CRM, and then go somewhere else for the most important part, the actual transaction. People are like, yeah, that feels broken. There's a lot of back and forth there between finance and sales. There's a lot that can be optimized. But I'm not going to give up QuickBooks, nor are we going to build a financial accounting tool. And so, what's the solution? The solution is leveraging Commerce Hub, billing out of the CRM, getting all of that value, and then now syncing those invoices and that commerce data into QuickBooks, so your finance team can stay there and do whatever they want. And they don't need to learn HubSpot, and your sales team doesn't need to go into QuickBooks to send an invoice anymore. And so, yes, I've learned a lot more about QuickBooks than I've ever expected in my life too, Chris. But I really do see the value here, and I'm so pumped to talk about it with all the listeners.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm happy you're here, and I'm happy to be the bad guy whenever needed to, point the finger at the accounting system that, may or may not be great at managing people data. I learned that early on, because after QuickBooks, I, used Salesforce for a couple of years, and, when these systems are built around accounts, right? And when I started using HubSpot, I was like, oh, this one's built around the contact record, that the person that we're trying to communicate with. As I learned more systems, I was like, oh, of course, HubSpot's better at managing communication with people, because that's what it's built around, right? So I think that's where, when we're trying to help, users, like, where do I do the thing? right? I usually bring it back to like, are we trying to manage communication like with people? Yeah, we should be doing that in HubSpot if we can. Right? A lot of things that HubSpot shouldn't be doing, like, product lifecycle management and like the books, right? But if we can get that customer data flowing, it's fun to watch the accounting teams who we think don't want to learn HubSpot, but they know that if we communicate better about our invoices, the invoices get paid.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's such a funny thing, but getting paid is part of the customer motion. And it feels obvious to say that, but you go into QuickBooks, you go into any of these accounting systems and you try and get a sense, okay, did this person open the email? Did they click? What were they doing, last week? Did they visit my website? You can't get any of that data. And so it's extremely helpful to see if somebody owes you a bunch of money and they're visiting your website, or, they're opening your emails. All that sort of clarity is what this integration is going to be able to provide. And that being said, you did highlight a point there that was one of my key talking points I wanted to touch on today. So taking a big step back and not talking about Commerce Hub, but talking about why y'all are here, the integration specifically. What I wanted to focus on today were like the 4 keys to understanding our new QuickBooks integration. And so you already mentioned point number 1, so I'm going to just start there. The data model between these 2 systems. Before you integrate QuickBooks and HubSpot, it's really important to understand that their data model is different than ours, precisely because of the reason Chris highlighted. It's got a different goal. It wasn't built around customer communication. So the big thing to understand the difference in these data models is the customer in QuickBooks. So in QuickBooks, you've got the customer object, right? That can be an individual, can be a company, right? It's who's paying you at the end of the day. In HubSpot, we have 2 different objects. We have the company and the contact. And so when we built this integration, we had a challenge, right? We said, okay, we've got 2 objects. We've got the companies and the contacts, and we've got to get that to speak to the one object, the customer in QuickBooks. And so that's essentially the challenge we were confronted with. And ultimately, what we went with is a contact sync that pulls some company properties. And so without getting too into the weeds, what does that mean? It means if you have got Juan Soto at Yankees.com, right? That's the contact in HubSpot. He plays for the Yankees. The Yankees is the company. And then if you go look in QuickBooks, you'll see there's going to be a customer, and that customer display name is going to match to the company name in HubSpot. So it'd be Yankees is going to be the customer display name. You'll also see an email on that customer, and that's going to be Juan Soto's email, right? And so what happens if you have a bunch of different contacts at the same company, free agencies, trades, whatever it may be? You've got other people associated with the Yankees and in QuickBooks, we're just going to have that Juan Soto. Well, that is where we have a little bit of flexibility. And that's ultimately where we get into the second key point that I want to talk about for this integration, which is the billing contact and who you send the invoice to are different people. This is really key, right? Because if you're billing out of HubSpot and you create an invoice for Juan Soto at the Yankees, that'll sync across no problem to QuickBooks because QuickBooks has the email and the display name that will match back. But people tell me all the time, well, I need to send this invoice to 50 different people. I can't just send it to Juan Soto. That's fine. There's a difference between the invoice, the contact that determines how the invoice syncs across, and the contacts that you want to send. So in HubSpot, once you click create on that invoice, you've got that link. You can send it to 50 people if you want to. It's not going to have any direct impact on how it syncs across to QuickBooks. So that's a really big piece there. And Chris, I'm curious. Tell me, like, you've worked with QuickBooks more directly than I ever have. You've worked with many more customers than I ever have. How many people are your customers typically sending invoices to? What does that process look like for you all?
Man, I'm just happy if they're sending it to people and not like AP at or billing at, right? I just remember these fields when you're looking at a customer record and you're like, I want to represent people somehow, and nothing is like but I've got to send to this inbox, but then the actual people are the ones contacting me back, and there's nowhere to keep track of this. So of course it's not going to be like, it's going to be super clunky. There's all these follow-ups involved. And I love to hear that because, as soon as association labels started making their presence known, uh, this is really the power there. And also why, like, you don't have to match, because what I've seen in these integrations, right, especially the old ones, which I think a lot of these these data sync versions are trying to solve for, right? It's either we just minimized the data, like HubSpot's not the system of record, so let's just get what we need out of it and send it out, and hopefully that other system is going to work for us, and we'll have to call the other team to figure out what happened after that. Or we're going to digital twin, we're going to just wreck HubSpot's data model, match it up with the other system. And in reality, if we're managing communication over here and accounting over here, billing over here, we don't need these 50 people to be in the other system as long as we're communicating with them. So I'm curious to see, like, how many, as you solve for that, like, were you having to train a lot of people? Like, no, it's okay for you to attach these contacts to the situation.
Yeah, I think it's something that even I struggled to really understand from the get-go because it runs so contrary to the logic. When you create an invoice and you put multiple people on there, or if you create an invoice and you want to send it to multiple people, it's logical that you would include them in the invoice, right? And so when I kind of realized, or when our team kind of realized, well, we wanted to take this a little bit more conservatively. The contact that you bill, the contact that's associated to the HubSpot's invoice is what's going to determine if it syncs across or not. And then once it's created, you can send it to whoever you want. Even though it's kind of contrary to logical thinking there, it actually makes a lot of sense once you get used to it, because it's like, okay, why do I want to send this invoice to 5 different people? Because I want all of them to be aware of it, so hopefully one of them pays, right? I'm not sending this to 5 different people so that my accountant in QuickBooks can check who the 5 different people are that were initially requesting the payment for, right? And so I think that's where it's like, okay, now I'm starting to see, like, we're using the contact to sync to QuickBooks, and then anything else after the fact, that's communication. That's about driving urgency to get paid. And I don't, why would you even want that in QuickBooks? Why do you want your customer to have 5 or 6 different emails? And so when we were thinking about the logic here, we ultimately had like a choice to make. We could just create a ton of customers anytime anything happens and everything will sync to QuickBooks at all the time, or we could play it a little bit more conservatively and try and make the logic here not strict, but conservative, in the sense that we're not going to go do anything in your QuickBooks environment. In fact, we're going to err on the side of caution. If you all bill the wrong person, we'll tell you in HubSpot, hey, this invoice is, doesn't have a customer associated with it in QuickBooks, and then you can do as you please. And so to kind of bring it full circle, right? If we're billing Juan Soto at the Yankees, and in QuickBooks, that's the email address we have Juan Soto's. If I wanted to bill somebody else at the Yankees, I can certainly do that. But HubSpot is going to start to give us a little bit of guidance, like, hey, are you sure you want to build that person? In QuickBooks, it says something else. We don't have that exact feature out just yet, but that's something we're working on. I think we're going to see very soon. And in the interim, if you choose the wrong contact, it's not going to sync across. You're going to have the ability to go in there and adjust that invoice, so we're not creating sub-customers in your QuickBooks account. And then that brings me to the third big piece here that I wanted to touch on, which is that if you have a situation where you need to bill multiple contacts at the same company, you can do that as well. It's, our default logic is not going to do that, but there's still ways to do it. And so we erred on the side of caution. We didn't want to over sync data to QuickBooks, but if that's the use case that makes sense for you all, absolutely it can be done. And so if you have a sub customer in QuickBooks for a particular customer, so let's continue with this Yankees analogy here. So you've got the Yankees with Juan Soto at yankees.com in QuickBooks. That's your Yankees customer. You can create a sub customer for Babe Ruth, for Reggie Jackson, right? And anything that is billed to Reggie Jackson at the Yankees or Babe Ruth at the Yankees in HubSpot will sync across no problem. And so ultimately, we're leaving it up to you. Do you want to create multiple customers for the same organization, or do you not? And our default logic is one per customer, because that was the way that we could most respect your environment. And at the end of the day, nobody wants to mess up QuickBooks. So we decided, let's play it conservative. That is the financial source of truth for your organization. And we can add a lot of value without overpopulating things. Because at the end of the day, you just want to get that revenue data in there, and we can absolutely do that.
Were you seeing a lot of challenges related to the customer, sub-customer? Where my mind is going is this challenge of like moving beyond sales CRM, basically, where, okay, deal should have one contact, one company, like anybody else doesn't matter. They're not associated to anything. Well, in reality, there's lots of people involved in this whole journey. So why wouldn't you want them in your CRM? But as we do that, we have different locations involved. We have different departments. We have different contacts. And I remember, and this is where, again, like QuickBooks doesn't necessarily do it well, but since it's a system of record, you could say, hey, I need to talk to this person when it billed for this location. So I'm making a sub customer record for that. That's all under this record. And we had that like I've shared some examples in the past, like HubSpot -Boston, HubSpot -San Francisco. Like, and that's how it made sense, because that's where we ship stuff, right? That is really hard for people used to doing stuff in HubSpot, maybe off of one company record. How have you kind of helped maybe learn some stuff yourself, but also help customers learn, like, hey, maybe we don't need to work out of one company record anymore?
It's a challenge. It's a real challenge, because what you have to do is essentially architect a solution that is going to take into account the intricacies of both systems to a certain extent. And there's a lot of different stakeholders involved. It's easy to overthink it, though. And so whenever I'm confronted with like a big, like, okay, how are we going to organize this? I always really go back to the basics, which is that this integration, it's really simple in a lot of ways. It's products, contacts, and invoices. That's what's going to sync across between these two platforms. The contact is going to have some company properties on it, but it's ultimately a contact sync. It's not a company sync. And so why do I mention that? Because deals are not going to sync across, right? And so I so frequently find that customers will go down these rabbit holes of trying to build deal association labels to child companies, then to parent companies, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, what I always go back to the basics, which is very much like it's the contact and the company that are going to determine what syncs across. Anything you're doing on the deal record is great. You should absolutely have those association labels if they help your process and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the association between the contact and the company that have any importance when it comes to that sync. And so I would say the biggest roadblock I run into is customers trying to build around the deal instead of taking a step back and being like, oh, the deal's great. Like, obviously the deal is important. But when it comes to that speaking to QuickBooks, it's really the deal's, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it should be something that you're constructing for efficiencies in HubSpot and not necessarily for that integration specifically.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think we're just at this is the beginning as far as breaking through some like deep deal habits that don't really mesh well when you think. And usually if I get a chance to talk to somebody, it's like deals are built for sales management, right? For the management of a deal. If there is no deal to manage, there's no sale to manage, and the order's already in, why are we making a deal? Like, if it's just invoice, right? And that's where, before all this, we had to make a deal because that's how we kept track of revenue in HubSpot, right? So I'm super excited to see, with orders coming in, all these other ways to kind of, create revenue records in HubSpot. keeping top of mind that there's lots of habits built around the deal. So I'm glad you brought that up. So I'm curious, like, but we do know if you do stuff over on the deal or maybe in the quote or on the contacts and the invoice shows up the way you want it to, have you found any kind of maybe gaps where they didn't usually fill this out, and now if they do, then the whole process gets easier? Is there any things like that?
I would say we've gotten a lot of feedback around that, because we want to make this process as seamless as possible. We don't want you to have to think about, is this the right person to bill in QuickBooks or anything along those lines. And so our team's taking customer calls daily to try and understand, okay, what could be more intuitive. And so without giving you not trying to give a non-answer here, but we've got some things we're working on, and I'm really excited for people to see them, because it is going to be a lot more intuitive. Going back to what you were just saying, though, about bad deal habits, a little bit of a tangent, but I just think that is such a good call out, Chris, because one of the things that I hear so frequently in customer calls is close one deal, or almost closed one, or something along those lines, and then they have an invoice, and then they go, oh, do I need to have a paid stage now? So frequently I'll hear that, oh, I want the invoice to move it from the close one to paid, right? And so one of the key things of Commerce Hub, one of the key decisions that we made is that you can absolutely set up those automations if you want to have invoice status, update deals, and all that sort of good stuff. But we did not make that default, because there's so much value you can get out of completely divorcing those two processes and then evaluating, okay, I had this many closed one, but how much money did I really get, right? And if you're constantly connecting everything back to the deal, because that's, that is a habit, I think you're just so spot on that it is going to undermine a lot of what we've been building with Commerce Hub, and just undermine your processes broadly anyway.
Yeah. Not to mention annoy your sales team, probably, because they don't understand the data that they're looking at, and they've got other people. So much of this is just like having separate things to own. Like your post-sales team should not have to mess around like with the pre-sales records. Like, they don't have to, right? So super excited to see this, just places for invoices, payments, subscriptions, all that existing, orders are in the system, and they're growing in their functionality as well. But that's where, when you take a step back and you forget about the habits and how things have been done, because all you had was deals and tickets. So you had to notify the payment was somewhere, right? But now that we have these other, like, just take a step back. Where does it make sense, to keep track of this? Like, nobody I do business with is sending me like deal information. It's like orders, like order confirmation, invoice, right? So I think once you can kind of pull back from the way things have always been, it's easier to get people on board. But just know that, like, for any partners or other people excited about Commerce Hub, like, know that baggage is there, as far as like, well, I always make a closed one deal. And those are like the keywords. If you see, like, make closed one deal, like, okay, let's just stop. Like, we're past the process where the deal, is doing its job, right? And generally, we're just doing it for reporting purposes at that point. Got a lot of other options now. And the team, I know, I've been talking to you guys all year, like, there's still a lot to be figured out, right? It's a big change when you go from, I always like to highlight, there's a total revenue like field on contacts and companies, and it just looks at deals, right? So the team wants to hear from anybody using, these extra revenue kind of reporting functionality, to say, like, what does it really need to look like in HubSpot? Where do we want to see it? Because that's going to be the superpower, I think, as we see these acquisitions and this movement towards, like, really completing the customer journey, right? So that we make this part easy for our teams and our customers.
100%. And I think that there's a lot of change management involved, and it's because what we're changing to is better. I think that's the thing that we've got to keep highlighting. Whether it's, having a paid deal stage, like, and learning that, okay, that's not a good practice, right? That's going to undermine a lot of things. Or it's billing out of the CRM versus the accounting system. And I think that that's something that I do see a lot of. I do see a lot of hesitancy at first, and then once you kind of explain why this is a better place to bill from, there is a kind of a click there, right? But I do see a lot of resistance to that because for so long people have billed out of QuickBooks and they're comfortable in QuickBooks, and maybe they like the fact that a sales rep has to reach out to them to create the invoice, right? I don't know why you would like that, but I really do hear that. Like I like this, this process, and people are very resistant to this change. But at the end of the day, the whole thing about billing out of the CRM is getting paid faster, right? I mean, that's what this is all about, getting paid faster, giving your sales team the clarity they need to understand where their accounts are at, to get those invoices out faster, and then to use our automation framework to accelerate that accounts receivable process. And once you realize, okay, billing out of the CRM accelerates the money coming into my business, that resistance to change is almost always like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. I'll learn the new system to bill here, because you're billing out of QuickBooks. Sure, we can bring that invoice data over into HubSpot. You can do some things with it, but it's not going to be as fast, as efficient, as automated as what you can do on our system. And then your teams in QuickBooks, you're paying for QuickBooks for financial tools. That's what you're paying for. You're paying for HubSpot for customer tools. And I think it's a hill to climb, but Chris, I think is that as long as we can get a bunch of good content like yours out there explaining why it's so important and why there's so much value in billing out of the CRM, I think people are going to climb that hill with us.
Yeah, because like some of the best at climbing that hill are your CFOs, your accounting teams, because literally it is like, I remember spending so much time on the 30, 60, 90 like collections like report. And that's really, once you can like that, like, because it didn't take long to say like, oh, these people just aren't, like, they get 1,000 emails a day. Like, and all we're doing is sending this automated notification from QuickBooks, right? So find those gaps where it's like, and ask the second question, like, are we sending them an email to remind them that their invoice is due?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, they get some kind of notification. It's like, okay, maybe we could do something different. Like maybe that will help them pay and see it, right? So a lot of opportunity there. And once you can connect that with the money, right? I've seen those teams adopt it much faster than any sales team, right?
100%. I mean, I think customers say, I want a check. I want a direct bank transfer. I don't want to pay any fees. Almost 50% of B2B invoices in the United States are paid overdue. Something like 15 or 12%, don't quote me, but it is double digits, are never paid. They're just never paid. And so the antiquated system is definitely going to cost you more than the processing fees of getting paid faster. And that's something that I just see time and time again, is it's much harder to compare the price of something that you are not paying, right? Because you're not paying any processing fees on those transactions. But if you really took the step back and probably did better on the SATs than me, you could calculate the compared breakdown. And it, like, most of the customers I speak with are like, oh my gosh, it's so much cheaper to process through a efficient and automated electronic system than it is to leave all that money on the street because I don't want to modernize.
Yeah,
It's exciting though.
It is. And all the time that we spend trying to get paid, like in the meantime, there's so much value here. And like your internal teams will love you for it once this becomes just easier, because they don't like nagging the hell out of people to pay their bill. Like it just all around gets better. Speaking of getting better, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask for thoughts, information, whatever you want to share about cash flow. Very exciting to see this acquisition. I remember at Inbound, Brian Halligan said something to the effect of like, watch out for Commerce Hub next year. That got me really excited. And then to see this, like, you guys aren't done.
We're certainly not done. Without getting too into the details or weeds, I'm so excited. This is going to be such an incredible addition to the Commerce Hub team. And I can tell you that, just looking at it from the outside, it's very clear that we believe in our value proposition of billing out of the CRM, right? I think that's what, if nothing else, I think that's what this absolutely validates. Is this was not something we were testing out and we're going to turn our back on. We are going to grow in this space. And it's because we have so many customers that we're speaking with that are really telling us this is revolutionary for their business to cut down on that back and forth, to accelerate that accounts receivable. And then Chris, I know you've worked with all of these different systems. I think you understand there is a lot of value, there's a lot of opportunity in this space, right? People are looking for a simpler way to do it.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's hard to overestimate how much opportunity, and it's easy to kind of point the fingers at like stubborn customers or people that don't want to change. But in reality, especially, there's two places I always see, like the quote to cash, right? Optimization, and then events management. There just has not been good, affordable software available that really connects the dots and can show you that picture that everybody needs to see without having to call across departments, without customers having to, try to keep up and call you over and over because they can't see stuff, and they've just made it so hard, right? So it's this interesting catch-22 of, it's been hard for everybody, and they're all settling in certain spaces, so they don't even know what to ask for. Like, they might be loving their Amazon experience, but they've never seen that in B2B. So like, I don't even think of asking for it. But in reality, things like HubSpot can make it like just more affordable than ever. And this is where connecting it with the rest of the platform, a platform like this has not existed before at this investment level. Like, it was either, for me, it was either glorified spreadsheets that we're sharing, or it's like $1 million, ERP implementations or system implementations that just take forever. And yeah, they do all the things, but they force you to do all the things too. And that's not what we're going for here. So it's exciting to see you guys move in that direction.
We're just so focused on that SMB, HubSpot broadly, but so much Commerce Hub. I think when you're a small business, you're getting up and running, and you have 8, 10 employees, you still kind of got everybody wearing all these different hats, jumping in, billing left and right, closing a deal, and then jumping into QuickBooks. It's not much of a problem. But once you get over that, that a hump of like 10, and you start to really specialize, instead of hiring people to chase down money, instead of hiring people to send out invoices, we're going to include that in HubSpot. That's the key thing, right? There's no subscription fee for Commerce Hub. It's just included. And so I know it's going to add so much value for customers across our install base, but I just love thinking about that 10-person company that's like ready to scale up, ready to specialize, and then they just stumble upon like, wait, this is included in this tool that I'm paying for. It's a really, those are my favorite conversations.
Yeah. And if I just thought of this, and I think it's a good way to end, like, these conversations, like, much different from the marketing and sales conversations that, we've been used to having around the value of HubSpot for a business. If there's any, like, is there any kind of advice you could give to a partner or consultant that, like, how do you talk to this part of the business effectively so that they can start to, understand this value?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I would say that I hear kind of two different approaches. So one is, you're speaking with somebody who's a HubSpot evangelist already. And you can leverage them to get the finance person on board, right? Because it's hard to convince somebody that lives in QuickBooks about this whole new platform, right? But if you have a evangelist at a particular organization who's seen the value of our automation reporting and just our CRM broadly, going through them, getting them bought in, it's pretty simple. And then having them sell it internally, that's the best kind of sale, the one that somebody else does for you. The other approach I've seen that works really well is to bring it up in sales onboarding. So get it front of mind when somebody's there, they're telling you, I'm buying into HubSpot, I'm going to do this sales hub onboarding. Bring it up in the beginning. And then as they get more comfortable in the tools, probably about 2 months out, once they're really seeing like, wow, there's a whole new way. I don't need to live in spreadsheets anymore. That's when I see a lot of success implementing Commerce Hub, because in my experience, people are much more open to evaluate a new solution when they're already in a state of evaluation and learning. When they're like, hey, I'm good, maybe sometime next year, those are much harder conversations.
Yeah. And I'll like that moment of evaluation. Sometimes we can think like, oh, we don't want to add this thing into, and like it's just going to complicate it and then we won't be able to close faster. Like I get it's so easy to find the thread, especially if you know QuickBooks is in the system, right? It's like, don't underestimate these owners, especially at these 10-person shops. Like the owners, somebody had to learn how to use QuickBooks. If they did that, they can learn how to use HubSpot and they will love you for it, right? That might close. I anticipate like over the next year, we start seeing that be like, oh my God, like I don't have to rely on QuickBooks for like all of my business management anymore. Yeah, sign me up, man. Let's do it.
I love it. I love it. Chris, I can't thank you enough for having me here today. This goes for you, anybody listening. If you ever are experimenting with the QuickBooks integration, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me an email, whatever is easiest. I'm happy to connect. And then if it's anything about Commerce Hub, send me an email as well. I don't know why I specified just for QuickBooks. It can be either or.
Either or, indeed. So if you're watching this and you've ever had the question, I wish we could do blank with our invoices better, take another look, find those opportunities, and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.